Captain Arjun Srinivasan. He's the Associate Director of the Health-Associated Infection Prevention Program at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in Atlanta. That report that we're referencing, published by the CDC, the center in Atlanta, which is a federal agency of the U.S. government. Arjun, thank you so much indeed for your time. Look, we're talking about what's going to happen in the post-antibiotic era, but the CDC is saying don't talk about what's going to happen in the future because that era is already here. How bad is it?
Yeah, that's exactly right. For many patients, they are already living in a post-antibiotic era, right? There are patients who are today experiencing infections for which we have no viable antibiotics to treat them with. In the United States alone, we estimate in our new report that there are roughly 2.8 million infections every year just in this country that occur with a bacteria or a fungus that's resistant to the antibiotic that would be recommended to treat it. And that's how we define and characterize antibiotic resistance. So 2.8 million infections every year, nearly 36,000 people then die from those infections. So it is a serious problem, a major burden. And that, of course, is only the burden here in the United States. And we know this is a global challenge that we face.
But science usually finds some sort of solution. Are companies, these big pharmaceutical companies, are they investing in finding new antibiotics, or are they looking at completely different drugs that can do the same thing as antibiotics?
So the answer is yes and, right? They're looking at both. There are all sorts of approaches that people are taking with new antibiotics, with new strategies like vaccines, other types of therapies like phage. But I think the important thing to remember is that we can't invent drugs to solve this problem. We can't drug discover our way out of the problem of antibiotic resistance because this is an evolutionary challenge. Bacteria and other living organisms have a will to survive. They will evolve mechanisms to survive. So the more new antibiotics we develop, the more resistance they will develop. So there has to be an all hands on deck approach. It has to be a both and. Let's develop new antibiotics, but we also really need to focus on better using the antibiotics that we currently have, because we know that overuse and misuse of antibiotics, as you have mentioned, is part of the contributing factor to this antibiotic resistance. So if we can address that challenge, we can extend the life of the drugs that we have now and extend the life of the new drugs that we hope to have someday.
I think every parent in the world has been in the situation where they've taken their child to a doctor and the doctor has said, here, have some antibiotics. And I know that I never want to be the one to say to a professional, really, is this the right thing to do? Even though I've been aware of this danger for years, because as we're saying, it's nothing new. It's just when we enter the post-antibiotic era, because the warnings have been there for years. How do we get to a situation, I mean, do you even think it's advisable to say to individuals when a doctor offers you antibiotics, make sure that you question whether you should be taking them?
You know, what we encourage, Adnan, is a dialogue with providers. What we know is that there are situations where the medical provider thinks that the parent or the patient wants an antibiotic, when in fact the parent or the patient is merely providing information. For example, a great story that people will tell is you'll come to the doctor and say, the last time that this happened, we got an antibiotic. Either I got one or my child got one. And what I as a physician hear is, oh, they're telling me they want an antibiotic again. But if you go and talk to that person after the visit, they will say, well, I wasn't asking for an antibiotic. I was simply telling my doctor information that I thought would be useful to him or to her. So we encourage people to have that dialogue and to say, do you think an antibiotic would help me feel better? And that's really the question to have. It's not to set up a confrontation between the patient and their provider, but it's to make sure that we're all communicating clearly and working from the same set of information and not making assumptions about what someone might want when they are at a visit. So it's that communication that I think is so important.
Okay, but it's not also about the interaction between a doctor and a patient. It's also, and I was quite surprised to learn about the overuse of antibiotics by farmers. What's the purpose of a farmer using antibiotics?
You know, there are a number of different reasons why farmers might use antibiotics. There are bacteria and fungi that infect crops, that infect animals, just like they infect people. And in certain instances, those animals need therapy for those infections, because that can be a problem for the individual animal or for a herd or a flock of animals. The challenge is that for a long time, antibiotics have been used in agriculture, particularly in animals, to make animals grow faster, what's called growth promotion. And what the global community really has been focusing on recently is making sure that, yes, when we need antibiotics to treat an animal that is ill, we should use them. But let's not use antibiotics simply to promote the growth of animals. And there has been a lot of effort globally to try and reduce and even eliminate the use of antibiotics as what's known as a growth promoter.
Just finally, Arjun, a far more simple question. How do we keep ourselves as healthy as possible? I wash my hands about 10 times a day, and I try never to touch my face, and I tell my kids to do the same. Probably I'm a bit weird.
Not at all. That is obviously important. Keeping your hands clean is one of the most important ways to prevent the spread of disease. Others, like we just talked about, be aware, be informed, talk to your provider. If you think you need an antibiotic, tell them, I'm giving you this information. I don't know if I need an antibiotic. I'm not demanding one. If you think I need it, I'll take it. But if you don't, then I'm happy also not to have an antibiotic. And of course, get vaccinated, a great way to prevent the spread of diseases.
Arjun Srinivasan, in keeping with your uniform, we salute you, sir. Thanks so much. Really interesting.